to be in a harbor when you've pulled in.
Oh, yes, in
And
Boston.
it really is incredible. It really is awesome. We kind of tore the boat. It's spectacular. For me, we also have a lot of examples. One of my favorites, and I remember this so clearly, it was early days in Rozalia Project, and we were sailing, it was beautiful, off the coast of Massachusetts, and we had some young woman on board. She was about to be a senior in college, and she was studying marine science, but didn't really have a great plan. And I always like to start with the dream and then compromise down. So I asked her, like, okay, what do you want? Like, what's the dream? And her dream was, like, I want to work, I want to do what we've been doing. I want to protect the ocean. I'd love to work at a big nonprofit like Ocean Conservancy, and that's what I want. And so that was that. We sailed and on we went. The next year, she graduated, and an internship at Ocean Conservancy came up, and she emailed me and said that she was applying, and I got to be a reference. And while I am not the person that was responsible for this, I know we played a part because she got the internship. She was so awesome. They gave her a job, and now she's one of the people who runs the Trash Free Seas program and has been doing it for the whole time. So for me, if I can help someone go into their dream job that lasts for 10 years and she still loves it, and it's science and it's ocean protection, that is extremely fulfilling.
So as I mentioned before, the Maiden Factor has sort of a dual program in that we raise the funds and awareness for education, and we also go sailing with all women. So obviously as a sailor on board, we interact primarily with the women who come sailing with us, and we've interacted with 89 women offshore since fall 2018. So it's been a pretty phenomenal number of women who came with us, and it's not always obvious that we are making a big difference, because to us it's just an everyday thing, but sometimes people are actually, quite a big mental step for them to leave sight of shore, to stand and watch schedule, to think that they can offer something more than just a lot of times women come to us with not a lot of confidence, and maybe they're not given enough confidence in the sailing situation that they're coming on. So when you step onto an all-female crew, a lot of the, oh, I'm not one of them aspect of sailing with mixed crews is completely eliminated. So it's not always obvious to us when we're working with women how moved they are, but we usually get these incredible notes back to us immediately afterwards. And I mean, we've had women move to tears, and it's impressive how much confidence a woman can gain just from the experience of sailing with an all-female crew, much less if they're going on an overnight or a 30-day passage, depending on the range of leg we're doing. So that's one massive area in which we've seen women and girls be affected. And as far as the other side of our program, there's multiple examples, but one that sticks with me is that in the first tour, it was more of a research and development phase for us to find out how to actually help girls in education. So we worked with 5 different charities that were tackling specific barriers to girls in education, and one of them was called Room to Read. And one girl they reached out to was located in India. She was from a very poor family, and she had aspirations to be a doctor, but it's quite unlikely that a woman in her community would have the access to education to achieve that level of a career. So Room to Read was willing to provide it for her, but her parents couldn't imagine it for her. It's a serious level of poverty that a lot of us aren't used to. So what they did is they actually have sort of culture consultants in the communities they work in, and they were able to open a discussion with the parents on why it was worth keeping their girl in the education system for longer, and why those types of jobs could be attainable to her and what it could accomplish for their entire family. This girl, she's currently pursuing her studies as a doctor. She's working as an assistant in a doctor's office, and she's been able to not only relocate her family to a better housing, but she has paid for all the education of her other siblings.
Wow.
how has your gender influenced the organization and the impact that you're able to have?
I think a lot of it ties into the last question, just that a motto that we go with is that if girls can see it, they can believe it, and that really goes a long way. Part of the reason I sticked with, I wasn't planning to be a sailor, believe it or not, but I stuck with it at a certain point because, well, first I stuck with it out of frustration because I wasn't getting the fair chance that I felt I deserved, and then once I thankfully got a mentor to help me, to train me to drive boats and things like that. I was helming 12 meters in Newport, and when I was doing that, I was often getting double takes because it's not a super common sight, or it wasn't 5 years ago. And I made a conscious decision that, okay, if I was getting double takes when I was doing this and people are surprised, and if that's improving the visibility for women doing something that's not expected of them, then I should still be doing it. And that ties into what our program believes in. If girls can see it, they can believe it. And again, we're not trying to turn every girl into a professional sailor, but we want them to dream big for themselves. Because it's not crazy for them to reach for their dreams, you know, it is possible. So.
Same question. Yeah, so I too, I think, you know, a lot of this looks like it has to do with representation and seeing people like yourself doing things that you might want to do. And for me, I was often outnumbered gender-wise and doing things that were more boys than girls, and then moving into Rozalia Project and using ROVs as one of our primary tools. I was once the only non-admin woman at a 100-person underwater technology conference. But I had a leadership role, so it was sort of okay for me. I was pretty impressed, actually, how I was received. But I think the best way for me to sum up the experience is, you know, we roll into, especially in the beginning, into communities and start, well, first we show up in this 60-foot sailboat, we pull out an ROV, which is a remotely operated vehicle, an underwater robot. Ours is called Hector the Collector. This checks out the trash and helps us collect it. Drones, we pull out drones. We've traveled with 3D printers so we could print people's ideas on the spot. And I don't think little boys care. Little boys don't care who shows up with the robot. I really don't think that is a thing. But little girls just might notice when the person that pulls up in a 60-foot sailboat driving her, like Ashley or I, when it's a woman who pulls out the ROV or the drone, who then fixes it when it doesn't exactly work and flies it and works the sonar and all the other things, I think that has an opportunity to make an impact.
I have to really think about this one. Well, first of all, in the disabled community, I'm not sure about the statistics anymore, but basically I think it's 70-30, 70% men, 30% women that acquire disabilities. Of course, not that from age, not what age does to us, but acquired disabilities. And so, as a woman, we're oh, there we go. Okay, did we hear everything? Okay, so as women, we're in a minority. As women with disabilities, we're in a minority. And I think it's, when I first started sailing on the Impossible Dream, I was always the only woman. And I always used to say, it's a frat house. and that is what it was. And it was like that because all the hotshot sailors were guys. And slowly, women started to find out about this program, and I started meeting people, going into ports, and slowly by slowly, I got more confident of myself, and I tried to get more women on the boat. And I would say that today, sometimes we're all women and one man on the boat. And recently, three of us took the boat on our own. And it was an incredible experience, 2 people with disability, 1 not. And I think it's... having a disability, especially a spinal cord injury, it's very complicated, and we all need different things to make us comfortable. And one of the reasons we don't go on a boat, Susie, he's been cooped up all day. He's really a good boy. And one of the things is there's a lot of, fear of humiliation, of things that can happen. And I think that's something, I try to present myself as very open, and I try to, nothing is taboo. There's nothing you can't ask me. There's nothing we can't talk about. And I just try to make it a comfortable atmosphere for a woman to be in. And it can be hard. It's hard already. And on a boat, it seems impossible. But I think that we're succeeding. I do.
Kate. Yes, thank you. One last question from me, and then we're gonna open it up to the audience, so be thinking about questions that you have for our speakers. What are some ways your organization has had an impact on the global problems? It's such a large problem with education and environmental issues and access. And so how do you feel that your organization is making an impact within these global problems?
That's obviously our goal, is to make the biggest positive impact that we can. And I think the best way to think of it is to split it up. Marine debris is a very big and complex problem, and we work in 3 areas. So if we think about our work in derelict fishing gear, primarily with that problem, we're going to remote islands and picking up tons of it. Ashley has brought groups this summer. What's the number just this summer alone?
Of debris?
Yeah, what's the weight? It's mostly all derelict fishing gear.
Over 6 tons.
6 tons just from a few visits. So our impact on derelict fishing gear is to remove it. We are also supporting innovation to help prevent it. That marine debris, it's not willful disobedience so much. It's storms and ships and other things. When it comes to consumer debris, which probably is like the widest of all of these problems, our impact comes in the form of doing data cleanups to help us understand the problem and give us the opportunity to come up with solutions because we have data to support them. Also, the education program. So we have worked now, we estimate, with over 100,000 people where I'm looking at them eye to eye, or Ashley's looking at them eye to eye, or one of our partners is. So in-person programs, a lot of people over the last 12 years. And I think that we are aiming for 3-dimensional and engaging, not just sedentary learning. I think that makes a difference. And the last is microplastics, and we're sort of doing all of this across each, but primarily our impact in the world of microplastics, I think, is twofold. One has to do with the microfiber problem, that's our clothes falling apart and little bits of our clothes ending up in the environment. It happens in the wash, in the dryer, and when we wear them. And we invented a device that's on the back table called a Cora ball that you put in the washing machine, and it helps prevent shedding in the first place and helps collect some of what would otherwise flow out into our public waterways. So that's a real direct impact. But we're also doing research to understand the problem and publishing peer-reviewed papers that can contribute to cross-industry understanding as we work towards solutions. And we're also working to make the science of microplastic itself more accessible. Because we gotta figure out if this stuff just everywhere and our clothes need to be resilient, or are there specific point sources or hotspots, in which case we could go after those to help prevent the problem. I think what it's gonna be is a collective solutions, plural, but either way, I think we're making an impact across these categories in multiple ways.
So as a global program, as we are interacting with communities around the world, of course, some of you might have seen yesterday, that was our first, that was a really big community outreach day for us in Newport, especially a collaborative one. But we do these types of things all over the world. We also do STEM-related activities on the boat with girls around the world, especially if they're already involved with a charity that's trying to help them with leadership or all kinds of things that can help a girl in their life. And they come to Maiden and we interact with them and teach them about STEM activities and hope they get inspired by working with us. On the charity side of things, we kind of have had like so much of us, before COVID, after COVID division of how we've done things. So before COVID, we were doing this research and development phase of how to support girls around the world. And we worked with 6 different charities that were tackling specific barriers to education. Because we can't just say, we want to do this problem and throw money at it. We want to find specific charities already doing that work effectively and work with them and learn from that. So some of those areas, I mentioned before, one of the organizations had they basically had mentors or cultural interpreters inside the community who could work with the parents in this case, in the case of that last story, or whatever specific individual may be not allowing the girl to continue her education. So that was one manner in which we enabled that. But other things are, if a community doesn't have access to clean drinking water, then it's usually the women and children who are sent to go and fetch that water. And if that takes up their entire day to go and get the water, bring it back, cook the rice, start over again, for basic sanitary needs and cooking, then they don't have the ability to go to school. Another one is access to sanitary pads. It's a really basic thing that most of us have access to in the US, but that's not true everywhere. So that's another way, schools may not have separate bathrooms for girls and boys, so then the girls don't have the dignity to go to school for part of the month, in which case they can't fulfill their studies and then they can't continue. So these types of things we don't necessarily think about in our day-to-day, but that makes a big difference for girls. So we spent the first couple of years of our campaign learning from them, and the money we raised in that time all got evenly distributed to those charities. So now we have a different approach where we raise funds on an ongoing basis. We're still tallying the numbers from America, but it's been somewhere in the ballpark of $100,000 raised in the US, which is incredible. It's going to make a big difference. So what we do differently this tour is that we're basically vetting charities on an ongoing basis, and individual projects or specific charities if we do the due diligence to know that they are going to achieve the most, and those funds are going to be allocated through them. We've also worked with charities in the communities that we visited. So one example of that is the Hudson River Community Sailing. Hudson River Community Sailing. So in tandem with them, we've established a grant to allow a girl through their program to become an instructor to work with the phrasing was not rolling off my tongue, but to work with kids who can really benefit from it. So that's another example.
I'd like to say that I'm from that community, the Hudson River Maritime Museum and Community Sailing, and it's incredible what you're doing there, and thank you very much. It's great. So, globally, well, the Impossible Dream was built in England, and she lived in England, and she crossed the pond. She made from Southampton, England to the BVI's. The first time she did it, the boat was chartered to a gentleman named Jeff Holt, and he is a quadriplegic, and he single-handedly crossed over from Southampton, England to the BVI's. He made a record, 17 days, and he did it single-handedly. And there are YouTube videos and things that you can see on it. And that's the sexy part of Impossible Dream, And yes, and I'm a sailor, I love sailing. But for me, it's about access in the world. For me, what I really, what's come to me through Impossible Dream is I realize that it's our cities, our towns, our countries that are failing us, especially for us in the disability community. When we're on the impossible dream, we are comfortable, we are happy, and we produce. And people with disabilities can work on the boat. And when I go into our towns and cities, forget about even just enjoying, traveling and enjoying, but people that want to be an integral part of their communities, and they want to work, and they want to earn money, and they want to teach other people. But if there's no transportation, if there's, there are steps, if the elevator's out of order. I live in New York City. The subway it's impossible. So what I try to bring across everywhere is, yes, it's incredible that we can do this sport of sailing, but it's also incredible to have access. And in that community there, Hudson River Maritime Museum in the Rondown in Kingston, I mean, since we've been going there, they've made an accessible dock. Many of the places that we have been going, when we come back, things are better. And people, we did a race from St. Pete's, Florida to Isla Mujeres, Mexico. Actually, Ashley was on that crew. And we got a first place. But when we left there, when we were getting our awards, we couldn't go up and receive our awards. And eventually, when our third award came, they brought it down to us. But leaving there, the mayor of this beautiful small island said, obviously we have a lot of work to do here. And that's what it's about.
Thank you very much. Who has questions? Don't be shy, raise your hand, go ahead. Could you stand up, introduce yourself, and tell your question, say your question?
I'm Bob Goforth, and I've had the honor of my wife and I have had the honor of being guest crews on Impossible Dream. And matter of fact, we just brought it down from Newport to Newport. And on that, and every time I go on it, it's amazing. And specifically on this past trip, that okay, we're gonna do this. I said, there ain't no way in hell that you would do that. And Paulina, and Will, they make it happen. So it's not just a slogan.
Captain and first mate.
Right. It's not just a slogan. It's the impossible dream makes the impossible happen. There's no way. And Paulina is a huge part of that. And talk about women doing good. Paulina is amazing. I've seen her do things with people that
She gets everybody out on that net. She's a physical therapist besides a first mate. And I mean, children with oxygen. She gets them out on the net. She lies them down with their parent. They can hold their child on the net, and Paulina makes it. It's no trouble. She's thrilled to do it.
amazing.
Yeah.
Another question I have. So we were talking about microfibers and laundry and everything else. So is it a bad thing for the plastics to be converted into clothing and then have microfibers be discharged in the laundry? Or is that a good thing? Or where do we stand on that?
This is a great question. I don't know if everyone heard. The question was, how do we feel about recycled plastic clothes, knowing that microfiber is a problem? So our organizational take on this is that we're sailors. And personally, I'm also a skier. And think about the clothes that we need to do that in right now. Technical clothing does in many ways keep us safe from the elements, doing a fair amount of different activities. And so our take is that we do need synthetics in our clothes. There's some garments that are better suited for it than others. Some places it would be great to reduce that. It would be great to do our synthetic clothes in a way that could be circular. So you've heard of the circular economy. So ideally, we make them out of something non-extractive, like recycled material. I think that's awesome. That is not digging for it or extracting it. turning it into something, and then there does need to be a design element that allows the end of the garment's life to loop back in. And so that does take design at the front end, like not having a ton of different materials or too many layers. So that's kind of our take on it. And I'll just give you one little morsel of hope, is I was a judge for this microfiber challenge last year. And it was about fixing the problem upstream of consumers. And there are companies who are working very, very hard on getting naturally derived materials to act like Gore-Tex. And when that happens, we will all get to sail around in something that isn't fossil fuel based, but yet keeps us warm and dry and temperature controlled, and lives in a circular economy in a much more effective way. Thank you for that question.
Thanks, Kate. So, why is sailing instrumental to the goals you have? Or another way of saying that is, how is sailing a metaphor for what you're trying to achieve for each of you?
Go first.
Well, you're bringing the metaphor of a vessel for change, and it's just easy, Sheila. I think I touched on this a little bit already in that because we are not trying to make every girl we meet a professional sailor, but we are just trying to use it to widen their imaginations for what's possible for themselves. So that's a big aspect of why our vessel is relevant. But I guess I didn't actually say in this because most people who are here probably know it, but our vessel, the history, the quick SparkNotes version is that the vessel Maiden is famous for having been the first all-female team to race around the world in 1989, 1990. So we bring that heritage with us, and it adds an element of pride and inspiration to our project that we couldn't do this without.
For us, and Sheila has sailed on American Promise. She has a good boat. So my husband and I, when we founded Rozalia Project, we first looked at a trawler, to tell you the truth. We looked at an old trawler that was up in Canada, and we're like, oh, the lab, it's gonna be amazing in this humongous boat. And then we sort of did some math on the fuel, and then we looked at each other, we went back, we drove twice to Canada to look at this boat, and then we looked at each other and we said, we're sailors. We're sailors, I think this needs to be a sailboat. And not only that, but it is pretty awesome. We keep track of the hours that we motor, the hours we motor sail, and the hours that we sail. And while we aren't just only sailing, I think you guys probably put the most sailing hours in, which is pretty awesome. It's on message for us. It really is. It's part of a consistent message of trying to do what we can to reduce the footprint. And a motorboat, we wouldn't have been able to do that. We're still not ready to use an electric engine on the magnitude of motorboat that we would need. And so for us, it's consistent, and honestly, it brings us joy.
And I would say the same about joy, bringing joy. So a little about me. I was not a sailor. I never sailed before my injury, my accident. And I learned how to sail at Shake a Leg, Miami. My surgeon brought me there. And I found joy and freedom in being out in the water. You know, if you know, you know. You know, the wind and the water. And I found joy and freedom in that. And I wanted to keep on doing it. And the impossible dream was sort of a whim. I found out it was for sale, and I knew I was able to do it. I went to see it together with Harry Horgan, and I didn't know what was going to happen. But through sailing and through being out in the wind and experiencing my joy, and then having the joy of bringing it to others, I was also, it enabled me to bring the story everywhere. you know, this story about people with disabilities on the water. People need to be on the water. The water brings, I mean, you know, it's scientific what the water does to our brains. And then it just talking about design, and it, honestly, it's a perfect platform. It's a perfect platform.
I'm Michelle. I'm based in Dubai actually, and I spend my summer here enjoying sailing as a tourist. I had the chance to meet the Maiden group when they were in Dubai some time ago. My question could be a little bit personal, whatever. I mean, how do you finance your operation?
What was it?
How do you finance your operation?
Finance.
Yeah.
Good question. Yeah, so thankfully, so I just want to say that like COVID obviously was a pause for our program, like it was for so much of the world, and we weren't able to restart that if it weren't for corporate sponsorship. So we were very happy to achieve to welcome a corporate sponsor to our program. It's a global logistics company. They're called DP World, and 4 years before they ever sponsored us, they actually had a tagline of wanted to work on women, education, and oceans. Couldn't be a better fit. And we actually just had our first we went to Dubai where they're headquartered, but we actually had our first, second to that, we had our first stop in New Brunswick, Canada recently, where they've recently built a port in the last 4 years, and it's quite special to have a sponsor where you've actually seen a community where they benefited, they brought commerce into it, they are doing what they preach, so that's quite cool. And what's really important to say about our sponsor is that they actually allow us every penny that we raise fundraising goes directly to girls' charities. We are a sailing boat, we are a sailing team, and you don't pay for any of that. Every cent, even like the people in the office, even the overhead for the nonprofit, all of that is covered from our sponsors, so that's quite special. And that's what brought us to Dubai.
We're funded in a fairly traditional nonprofit, multi-category way. So we have been funded by really generous foundation funding and family foundations. We have some great corporate partners of various ways. One is through 1% for the planet. So companies who pledge 1% of their gross income, not profit, but gross sales, to environmental causes, which is great. And we are funded by generous individuals who love the ocean and what we do, like people in this room.
With difficulty. So I originally funded the purchase of the boat and the start of the 501c3, and now we have some sponsorship from different rehabilitation organizations and hospitals. So the format is that they sponsor us to come to their town, and they get, you know, the name on the boat and a certain amount of sales for their individuals, but they also allow us to work with people from the community who, no one is charged for coming sailing on the Impossible Dream. So these rehabilitation institutions and corporations, they help us. The funding for the Impossible Dream is difficult, but we do a lot of crowdfunding. We find generous people along the way that help us, but it's difficult.
Hi, my name's Susan, and I just have a question for Deborah. I've been on the Possible Dream before, and I've seen both you and Harry go into the water. So can you just explain how you get into the water?
Okay, so when I got the boat, I said, well, how are we going to get into the water? And then, you know, I was looking at these swim platforms which weigh the boat down like crazy and are very expensive. And then I realized that the davits for the dinghy, right, So what we do is, we take the dinghy down, we put a hammock attached to the davits, we get into the hammock, some of us can transfer in, otherwise two-person lift in the hammock. In the hammock, you're really closed and comfy and feel safe, and you're lowered down into the water. Get off the hammock and have a swim, get back on the hammock, and we do the same thing for getting in and out of the dinghy. And we've gotten in that dinghy 5 people and 3 wheelchairs. So where there's a will, there's a way.
Is there one last question? We have time for one more question.
It's a simple one.
Go ahead.
I'm Mark. Susan's my wife. So I'm trying to muster up some courage to get up after her. But for the Maiden Factor, what's the range of the young women you help?
Like the range in ages?
Age, yeah.
On board actually sailing, the 89 women that we've gone sailing with are girls. They have to be 18 or older to take offshore legally, but we don't have a limit of the people who we interact with on land. So I mean, we've had infants put their hands on the kite and check out the steering wheels and things like that. And the upper range, I don't know, 60s, 70s have gone offshore with us. 70s. Yeah, even racing crew in the 70s. We've had a pretty wide spectrum of participation.
We've had a one
I was just going to ask, why don't all of you answer that question?
102 years old. We work in Martha's Vineyard. There's a camp called Jabberwocky, and that's originally how we started going to Martha's Vineyard, and that's a camp for people of all ages with the cerebral palsy. And there is I never know what to call it, a retirement home in Martha's Vineyard that had seen us there, and the director wrote me a letter, and at the end, telling me about who lives in that home, and that they were all ex-fisher people and people from the island that love the sea, and they don't get it, most of them are in chairs now. And at the end of it, she said, Deborah, it's not just about bingo. So from there, and now we do it in quite a few ports. We work with the older population that are alone a lot and living in semi-institutions, and it's a wonderful thing, actually.
For education programs, we have neither a low end or a high end that's any kind of cutoff. But I will say that in the video that you saw that Gigi made, that we kicked this off in that video, we had people in every decade on our sailboat from 20s to 70s during that video, which is pretty good for us. We've always been also 18 as a minimum for sailing on American Promise's crew, and Ashley worked with a group this year that included a 74-year-old powerhouse, that's how they were described, cleaning up a remote island off the coast of Maine with everybody else. It was good.
Yep, one quick question. Go ahead.
Do you work with artists with the debris that you find? Are actively, are there?
Yeah, cool question. It was, do we work with artists? And yes, we, in a bunch of different years, we try for this every year, we have a guest artist. We've had guest scientists and that kind of thing, but we have guest artists. And they've included some spectacularly talented people who've worked in different media. I'd say one of the highlights is a woman called Cindy Pease Rowe. She's from Long Island, and she collects primarily lines, like fishing ropes, but all sorts of things, and she makes sea creatures out of them that are incredible. And what she also does is she makes it so we all can play too. So she does these little kits, and all you have to do is find some rope, which is unfortunately fairly easy, and you can wind it around a wire, like a sort of a form, and My mom and I did it one year. We stuffed it with some balloons that we found, so there's like a little sparkle in between the rope bits, and yeah, we have them hanging in the house. So we do, and something that we try to do that I'm guessing all of our teams do is to include people on board from a diverse professional, academic, geographic, age background. And I think no matter what we all are doing, I know that we've found that putting people on from different perspectives, whether it's art to help produce art to communicate that way, or people who are good with words, or people who are good with numbers, or people who are just good with other people, that whatever that is, that it helps us raise our game and make the impact that we're trying to make.